Hello, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webcast on creating an ethical office environment. This is something that I think all of us can relate to, and we have a wonderful speaker today, Carol Barrett. She's going to be talking to us about our office environment and trying to support our ethical standards through the AICP Code of Ethics. Carol is our ethics guru. She's currently the planning manager for the City of San Gabriel in California. She's the author of Everyday Ethics for Practicing Planners, which was published by the American Planning Association. She has spent a lot of her career helping our profession with ethics, including serving on the AICP Ethics Code Revision Committee in 2002. She helped author the combined APA-AICP Statement of Ethical Principles. She helped with the APA Statement of Ethical Principles. She's been a member of the APA and AICP Ethics Committees, and she's been the Chapter President's Council representative to a committee which drafted the original AICP Code of Ethics back in the 70s. She spent a lot of time in service to the profession, serving as the Vice President for Professional Development of the APA California chapter and through 2010. She's been past President of the Texas chapter, past President of the National Capital Area chapter, and a past member of the APA Board of Directors. She is a fellow of AICP and has received a Distinguished Service Award and the Diane Donald Award. So she's a perfect person to be talking to us today about ethics. I have a few things right before we get started. If you are experiencing any technical problems, you can just type a question into the question box. If it's something simple, I can help you with it. Or you can call our 1-800 number on GoToWebinar for tech support, and they can resolve any larger issues. The slides for today's webcast are available at the utahapa.org website, so if you want to download those slides for today's session, you're welcome to do so. After the fact, I will have the recording for today's session up on the website as well. We have lots of chapters, divisions, and universities that are helping to sponsor this free webcast series, and Ohio is our chapter sponsoring today's event, so thanks very much to the folks that help put these sessions together. We have a number of upcoming webcasts that may be of interest. One of the things I'll point out is that this quarter we're trying to put a focus on the issue of aging in our population and what are the impacts planners should be thinking about. So we have a number of sessions, one tomorrow on the impacts and opportunities of an aging population, and a number of others that are coming up through the remainder of the quarter. So I encourage you to go ahead and register early if you plan to attend any of those events. To log your CM credits, it is up on today's calendar on the CM website at APA. Just look under today's date and you'll select Helping to Create. That's the title that you'll see on the calendar. As I mentioned, a PDF of today's slides and the video recording will be available at the utah-apa.org website. My name's Jennifer Evans Cowley, and I serve as the coordinator for the webcast series, and so I appreciate everyone that submits their ideas for presentations, and I appreciate your attendance at today's event. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol. Carol, just in just a second, it's going to pop up and ask you to transfer over to you. So Carol, when you're ready, just press the little button that says transfer over to you.
Have we got it?
Yes, we've got it. Thank you so much. You can go ahead and get started when you're ready.
Okay, I'm trying to make the little box go away.
Oh, if there's a little arrow that sticks out on the side of your GoToWebinar
there it is.
panel.
Got it.
All right,
and
there you go.
Move this way over there. All right. There we are. There's the first slide. Hello, everybody, and it's my pleasure to be with you during this webinar. We're here to have a conversation. I'm not an ethics czar, and I'm certainly not perfect, although I love the fact that somebody in the world said that I was. I'm happy to visit with you after this session is over as well. So you can see my Gmail address. If there's something that you'd like to discuss that doesn't really feel like a general share with the group kind of question, we can talk with one another later. If we're going to talk about how you build and sustain an ethical organization, I want to define what that means. And there are really four components to working in an ethical organization. Employees have to see that there are moral situations out there. They have to care about doing the right thing. They have to be able to figure out what the right course of action is, and then they have to be able to act on their decision regarding the right behavior. So if we've got a goal of what an ethical organization looks like, then we should consider what are the building materials that we have. For planners, there is very specifically a couple of documents. One is the AICP Code of Ethics, and we have to spend time on that because of the CM credit provisions. Other building materials include what you bring to the environment as a human being. There may well be, where you work, local and state ordinances that address what ethical requirements are. There's the culture, the community values in which your organization functions, and that can include tradition, history, the diversity that characterizes your community. And I'm going to digress for just a second and say we just celebrated Chinese New Year. In the city I work, we're about 70% Asian, which means there's a very strong culture around generic gift giving as part of the new year, and the gifts come in the form of little red envelopes that are just the right size for some cash. And we have to put signs up at our counter saying, we really appreciate the notion of your wanting to give us gifts, but don't. Other building materials that are in place are the people who help to set the cultural tone for the organization. The leaders, the supervisors, the folks who are actually doing the work. And so then it comes down to me. Who are the people that I work with? What is the work that's on my desk? And how does that work get done? All of these are the building materials for an ethical environment. I often engage in friendly banter with people about why we have discussions about ethics, and a frequent assertion is, look, I'm a pretty ethical person. I assume other people are ethical people. We really don't have to spend time on this, but we do. The Ethics Resource Center recently published a study that found that nearly 60% of governmental employees at all levels, federal, state, local, had witnessed violations of ethical standards or policies or laws in their workplaces within the past year. Now, I don't have detailed data for planning consulting firms as distinct from public entities, although later in this conversation we're going to look at some information about private businesses. But I don't have a basis for thinking that life in consulting land is substantially different from public sector planning. So the misconduct most frequently observed, at least by federal employees, was abusive behavior, safety violations, lying to employees, and then putting one's own interests ahead of the organization's interests. 58% of the people who witness misconduct don't report it because they don't believe managers would take action, and then a full 30% think there's going to be some retaliation if they do reporting. Additional surveys show that fraud occurred as frequently in government as the private sector, with comparable rates for things like altering documents, misrepresenting hours worked, lying to customers, the public, employees. And it's my belief that right now planning ethics is planning ethics is in a time of special challenge. I don't know about where you work, but if I hear the mantra, we want to be business friendly, one more time, I'm going to punch somebody, or at least think seriously about it. Cities are desperate for jobs. It puts pressure on planners to approve projects, cut some corners that they might not otherwise think of doing. And some of that pressure is coming from our supervisors, leading to ethical compromises. So those are reasons why I think we need to talk about ethics. Ethics is not just following the law, however, and ethics is not just your morals or values, although I would say that your morals and values are incredibly important. There's nothing in the code that says you shouldn't murder people. The assumption is that you bring those personal morals and values to the table. Maybe like a lot of you, I learned my first lesson about right and wrong when I was 4 years old, stole a pack of gum. My mother found it and drove back to the grocery store, asked to speak to the manager, and forced me to return the gum and say what I had done. Okay, so I learned from that stage in my life the importance of honesty over dishonesty. Things like kindness over cruelty, doing the right thing instead of breaking the law. These are the values you bring to your understanding and interpretation of the code. So for planners, our code is really very central, and there is a specific meaning for ethics that's derived from the Greek. That was an easy one. It's either derived from Greek or Latin, right? It comes from the word ethos that refers to character or sentiment of the community. Ethics means the principles of conduct that govern our profession. We expect planners to conform to the standards of that profession. And once again, I'm pointing out that in some cities there are additional local codes of ethics that you need to comply with. I'm going to make the rash assumption that everybody who bothered to dial in knows something about the AICP Code of Ethics, that it has 4 sections: the aspirations, the rules of conduct, the procedures. You may not have noted that the last amendment to the code produced a whole new section that says if you're convicted of a felony, you automatically lose your membership. And so my general observation about the code when I sit and read it and talk about it with people is there's lots of process guidance, less information about what the content of our work should be, emphasis on how we should do the work. So the first part of the code that has the aspirational principles, 19 of them address process. 2 address both process and content, and 2 focus primarily on content. What's significant about that is that's the aspirational part of the code, which means you can't be charged with failing to adhere to those principles. The rules of conduct, where you can be charged with violating your code, all 26 of those deal with process. If you had to summarize all of those process exhortations, it's about honesty, it's about truth, it's about fairness. But honesty is qualified by disclosure, in the sense you read the code and it says you can do some things that you think you might not otherwise be able to do as long as you disclose it. You have to tell the truth, but there are qualifications. You only have to adhere to the standards of truth-telling as modified by not deliberately lying or lying with reckless indifference. And that fairness thing, once again, it's mostly about fairness in the process, not in the outcome. And frankly, I understand completely why we focus so much on process. Planners' work is primarily in the form of recommendation. The final decision makers modify or reject those recommendations, and we content ourselves with the efforts to give them wise recommendations. That's the reality. But it's process and content together that constitute ethical behavior as planners. One thing that I really want us to think about together is if we talk about process in terms of how we do planning, we also should think about the way we work with one another in terms of process, because this process component impacts each of us on a daily basis. It's the way a group goes about being a group, remaining a group, accomplishing the work. It's how we go about recruiting and involving people, how we make our decisions in a planning environment, and how the group handles the work we do. Sometimes those processes devalue the people involved because they're highly controlled. We may be in an environment where it emphasizes winning. We may be in an environment where we exclude or shut out people. And as planners, I think if you talk about having an ethical organization, the very first place to begin is the process by which our groups do our planning work internally. And our goal is to do it in a way that strengthens our connections to one another and to information. So if we've talked some about process and we've acknowledged that that whole process discussion is not just how we work with the community, but it's how we work with one another. Let's look at the guidelines that are in the code that specifically provide information about what the content should be of our planning. If you pick up a major planning document, and believe me, I understand these are not standards for every memo that you write or every conversation you have, because frequently we're working on very small, discrete pieces. But let's step back and look at some of the larger things we do as planners. When we read the document, it needs to be clear that we focused on the interrelatedness of decisions, the long-term consequences of what we do. There needs to be information related to excellence of design, the heritage of the natural and the built environment. And then we have aspirational content standards around expanding choice and opportunity, being sensitive to the needs of the disadvantaged. Oh, I see a typo. It's disadvantage, not disadvantages. And promoting racial and economic integration. And going on even further, we're supposed to alter the policies that work against economic and racial integration, and finally, not just accept the customary solution, but make sure that the recommendations are actually appropriate to the facts at hand. So we've got that kind of guideline. So if you step back and you say, okay, if that's the language that our code provides us about what constitutes ethical plans, you can see that from a philosophical point of view, we're really talking about justice-based planning and focus on the common good. And what's significant about it coming down to those particular philosophical concepts is we're not talking about a golden rule thing. You know, as long as I treat you the way I want to be treated, it's a good enough plan. It's definitely not utilitarianism. We can't argue that as long as it's the greatest good for the greatest number, it's a good plan. And certainly the ends justifies the means is not envisioned as ethical conduct within our Code of Ethics. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk with you some about leadership and ethics. And I'm going to do that very specifically, and that's because the research on ethics shows that formal ethics programs elements like having a code have far less impact on our outcomes than our perceptions about leadership and consistency and follow-through. So if having ethical leadership is perhaps even more important than just having a code of ethics in terms of having the overall ethical culture, we need to focus some on what that leadership means. When people are interviewed and they're asked what are the most important factors that make you think it's important to be ethical in your work environment, It's because they see leaders focused on the issue of ethics. They think the organization is fair. They see that ethics is discussed within the organization and that ethical behavior is actually going to be rewarded. When you flip the question and you say, are there aspects of leadership that mitigate against having an ethical culture? It's the perception of expectation of unquestioning authority or the obedience to that authority, the focus on self-interest by supervisors rather than concern for employees, and supervisors ignoring community impact when they make those decisions. So the notion is, you see that stuff, it encourages you not to act ethically. And my exhortation to everyone participating in this phone call today is, don't just get your CM credits, but instead decide that you have an opportunity to become a leader in ethics in your organization. In fact, each of you is already an expert in leadership despite where you may sit in a hierarchy, because you've watched it. You've experienced it throughout your life. You can remember the times you've been in a meeting where one person ran the show. Or you were in a meeting where there was a lot of engaged, hot debate. Somebody abruptly called for a vote, leaving clear winners and losers who felt railroaded because of the way the meeting was conducted. So we all, as planners, actually have a fair amount of experience in ways leadership is carried out. Leadership is both relational, and I think it has a very strong ethical process for bringing people together who want to accomplish positive change. And if you take up my challenge about being engaged in transformational behavior within your organization around ethics, I think there's 4 basic principles for leadership and ethics. Knowing yourself, being committed to engaging in learning new information as you increase your competencies in your role. I think you have to be open to differences and value other perspectives and attitudes. I think you have to practice listening skills and coalition building and interpersonal skills. And finally, there has to be a way to practice civil discourse around the topics where we may not have agreement. And here's my little inspirational, I hope it's inspirational, idea for working on ethics. If we don't have a task to go with our vision for building an ethical organization, all we've got is a dream. If all we've got is a bunch of jobs to do without a vision, then all that work is just drudgery. But if instead we have a vision around building and sustaining ethical organizations, and we know some work that we can do in order to do that, what we've got is hope for our communities. Alrighty, so if we want to step out into that great unknown with you as the ethical leader for your community, there are a couple of things you have to be committed to do. And it's around sharing resources, being inclusive, and collaborating. What makes leadership ethical is recognizing that the workplace requires very, very different skills around collaboration and managing a diverse workforce than the kinds of experiences that characterized a lot of workplaces, and may still characterize some, frankly, of the old 2-rule strategy. You remember that one? Rule number 1, the boss is always right. Rule number 2, see rule number 1. I don't think that that kind of a leadership style is really effective today. And instead, I think employees are looking to help build a shared purpose and the most powerful thing that you have an opportunity to do is lead by example. I don't think that's easy. I think most people wake up in the morning wanting to do the right thing, but then there's all this weird stuff that goes on in the office. Could be peer pressure, could be elected officials engaging in our work, could be something a supervisor says. So I don't diminish the notion that this is hard work. It takes courage to sometimes stand apart. But I believe that if we've practiced those skills of collaboration and working together with our colleague to build authentic strategies for addressing our shared concerns around the organization and the way we do our work, that in fact you won't be standing alone. So if you want to build an ethical team, you have to ask yourself, how can I go about doing that? There are additional surveys that show that in organizations with well-implemented ethical programs and the strong ethical culture, that misconduct falls. And incidences of bad behavior decrease, and the reporting of the bad behavior increases. So if you're focused on the notion of creating this really ethical organization, you need to have more people on the team than just you. Things that you can very specifically do on the job is engage in your group discussion of what your processes are. I've been in so many environments where we focus on our failure. What went wrong? How do we avoid those mistakes? We should take time to also know why what we did went well and what we can do to ensure future successes. You have to be able to also encourage reflective back talk. People have to believe that they can honestly tell you what they think or see or hear. And I want to make a little bit of a distinction about people who have fabulous management skills, like running great meetings, with leadership skills, because those two are not necessarily the same. Leadership means creating the space in which we can do the reflective back talk. The other thing that an ethical team needs is the ability to understand that we've got standards out there, know what those standards are, and apply them, which is why when I do ethical conversations with people, we often use scenarios, because if people have not practiced the notion of saying, oh, here's an issue and what would we do and why would we do it, when they're actually confronted with that first big early in your career ethical issue, you feel overwhelmed, you flounder. But it's the notion that there is a systematic way to think about what we do when we perceive there's a problem that will make it easier for us to deal with those problems. I like to recommend people follow a very specific set of steps when they have to make an ethical decision. Stop and think. Could this decision or situation be damaging to someone or some group? Does the decision involve a choice between good and bad alternatives, or maybe between two goods or the lesser of two evils? Frankly, if the decision is between good and bad, it is a lot easier, but often the decision is between two competing goods. Frankly, most ethical decision-making goes beyond our just having mottos and pledges like we will serve our customers with honesty and courtesy. Often, understanding the problem takes us into a broader need to understand our organization as well as the code. The next step you've got to go through is finding out the facts, the relevant information. What do you know? What do you don't know? Can I know more? Who can help me learn that? Who has a stake in the decision? Are some concerns more important than others? Why? Then the next step is creating options. What are my choices? Who can help me think more creatively about what I could do? Then you need to take time to examine the specific guidance. You may not have memorized the code or other relevant materials. You need to look at that. There's the next step, which is considering the consequences. What are the likely outcomes of the different choices? Can you live with those outcomes? Then you've got to make a choice and test that action. Whatever it is you're proposing to do, you've got to give it the test of publicity. If I had to explain this story because it's on the front page of the newspaper featuring me and what I did, would I be comfortable with that? And then the last step is acting, but I go beyond just you have to do it. You got to learn from what you do. And I just offer one last observation. Mistakes will be made. That's just part of what happens as you build up your repertoire of skills in ethical decision making. So what we're going to do now is look at a scenario, and Jennifer, you can decide whether and how you would like people to respond to this scenario. I hope anyway somebody wants to respond before I launch into some observations about it. We have 3 scenarios to discuss, and then at that point we're transitioning the conversation so that it becomes more of a dialogue and much less of a lecture. So let's go to scenario 1. Pretty straightforward. You've got a review process in your city, you've got a bunch of projects under review, and bingo, a nice big job-inducing economic development engine comes in, and a council member sends emails saying, stop work on everything else in the city and move this to the front of the line. How do you respond? And let me ask, do people even think this is an ethical issue? So Jennifer, I'm going to give people a few seconds to think about it, and can I turn this back to you to sort of gather some input?
Sure. What I'm going to do is allow folks to go ahead and type in some responses of whether or not you think it's an ethical issue and how you would respond. So I know it'll take folks a couple of minutes to enter their responses. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and throw out a question to you, Carol, while people are typing in their messages. Okay, so one of the questions, this is from Lenora. She says, my objective was always to empower the employees in my department. However, what do you do to rein them back in once they view themselves as a planning decision maker without consulting the boss?
Okay, so I believe that in a situation like that, that one way you can approach it is well, the good news is we've got people who are out there who are working together. They honestly may not understand the negative consequences of not engaging the boss. And to talk about, you may not realize that if you're out there doing this, I'm not able to do something else, or you may get way far out there and it's not really appropriate for us, or it conflicts with another policy. So spend some time formally saying that we have the shared goal of really having good work out at the end of the pipeline, but part of what defines really good work is that it includes engagement and review by the supervisor. Then I think you have to ask yourself, what can I do to make that process of engagement and review frequent enough and perceptive enough that people want to participate in it. So I begin the conversation from assuming that they just may not have all of your skills in understanding why being free agents, so to speak, and I may be overstating the case, but why just going out there and doing it does not build the organization. So talk about, our shared culture is around having a really strong organization, and I know that that's your goal as well, and so we need to have a more embracing picture of what all those steps are.
Okay, wonderful, Carol. So I have a number of folks that have responded, and it's all over the board. So Atma, Jenny, and they say, yes, it is an ethical issue. We've got a bunch of people that say maybe, not necessarily, not sure. And then Paul and Stephen both say it's not an ethical issue, but a legislative or a political issue. So you've got some responses all over the board. I'll just take Linda's as an example. She says this should be statutory with the ordinance providing the timelines for review. It is ethical too, since the planner will need to ask the city council person to abide by the statutory timeline. So I will those are a couple of the responses, and I'll let you go from there, Carol.
Okay, so part of what I want to acknowledge at the outset of having my conversation is I actually think this is one of these scenarios where cultures of organizations may be fluid enough to allow for some of this to happen. So if we go back and we go through our steps about stopping and thinking and do you have all the facts, I set these scenarios up so that you never have all the facts, because it would take 2.5 pages and I'd still manage to leave something out. I kind of wrote it because I want people to think about this as, ooh, this might be bad. The answers that said, if you've got, for example, and in California we have something called the Permit Streamlining Act, and we're supposed to finish our review within 30 days. If you can comply with what your mandated deadlines are by shifting stuff around, I think it's reasonable for supervisors to say the resources that we have are going to be deployed slightly differently in order to do this. So we're not disadvantaging anybody. We're not missing statutory deadlines. I think that I also, in terms of what are the facts have, it says a city council member orders. Well, that is, hello, red flag. Why would it be, okay, I'm getting all tongue-tied. City council members should not order anything to be done in the planning department. They can certainly convey interest, and it's not clear in here, because I wrote it unclearly, whether you're in a situation where an individual council member picks up the phone and directs what you do on a day-to-day basis. And if that's what the case is, that is a whole different ball of wax that raises huge ethical issues. So once again, we don't have the facts about how this mandate came down. So we're collecting facts. We're also should be brainstorming alternatives. And let's assume in this case that if we pick up this big project, it really is going to cause problems with other statutory deadlines and other projects. What other alternatives out there? Do we have consulting planners on call who could come in and help? Are there different ways of managing the workload so that what is written as a city manager goal, but I'm sorry, what's written as a city council directive, but might well be an actual goal that your city has about, achieving timely review of major economic development and issues, but how else might that be done? There needs to be some brainstorming of alternatives. So I believe that whether or not it's an ethical issue depends on additional facts that you do not have before you. But remember, before we make our decision, we spend a lot of time gathering facts, and that it could be an ethical issue and might provoke the need for some more detailed consideration around what the ethical requirements are that are in place. So that's my take on scenario 1. We got great responses. Let's look at scenario 2. This one's a little longer. Same thing, Jennifer, while people are reading and thinking about it, if you've got just a general question that's come to you, I'd be happy to chat.
That sounds great. Okay, so we have a question from one of our members, Megan, says, what happens when the AICP ethics standards come into conflict with religious beliefs, most specifically the provisions governing discrimination against minorities and religious beliefs that support discrimination, most notably in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered community?
So let me make sure I understand.
And she provides a little bit of an example, so let me add on to that. So a few years ago, she worked for a department where the zoning administrator treated gay couples differently than non-gay couples, specifically in terms of a family subdivision. The local code would not have precluded the subdivision. A lesbian couple came in to get a family subdivision for a parent. The land was actually owned by one woman, and the parent was the mother of the other woman. The zoning administrator said that they couldn't have a family subdivision because they weren't a family. When questioned, he said he based his definition of family on the beliefs of his church. The same person also openly discriminated against one of the members of the department, treating him far differently, including recognition of the employee's relationship and employee's desire to put a picture of his partner on his desk. Everyone else in the office had pictures. The employee wound up leaving, and I won't get into the details of that. So that's kind of some background to help you.
Well, I'm trying to think of a polite way of saying that that behavior is not acceptable by any manager. You know, under the most basic human resources policies of any city, much less under the Code of Ethics. It is simply impermissible. And I respect someone having really strong religious beliefs, but when you choose to be in an environment where your religious beliefs cannot be central to the way you do your work, you've set yourself up for a really difficult time. And I understand kind of what the question is, and that sometimes we do tiptoe around some of these issues, but I can't find anything that makes that defensible behavior. I think if you were the boss, the manager, and you said, you know, this just bothers me every which way but loose, and you wanted to keep your job, you might say, I don't know that I could be as objective as I should be, so I'm going to just step away from this. I'm not going to engage in reviewing it or understanding it. I'm going to put somebody in charge of working on this who can be completely objective and understanding about it. And I suppose there is a way that you could keep your job by recognizing that your religious beliefs are out of sync. So I don't think we say to people you can't have religious beliefs. I think we say to people that if you choose this job, you have a different set of primary responsibilities, and if there is a conflict, you've got to step away from doing the work either on a temporary basis with respect to some zoning determination or on a longer term basis. And I'm really sorry that people had to go through that. Enough. I've talked enough about that.
Okay. All right. We have a number of responses that have come in. So Margie says, don't sign off, but continue to work towards a compromise. that meets current codes. Another one, Jenny says, set up a meeting with the other public agency to review other solutions. We would not issue the building permits. Another person, they've scrolled off the screen, said, York says, make your supervisor sign off. Lenore says it's unethical. The answer about signing off is no. And we've got a bunch of other responses in here as well. I'm sorry, I can't get to everyone. So, Carol, you want to respond?
Thank you. That's great because this is what I'm dealing with right now. And everybody who said we may not quite be at the point where we have to draw the line in the sand. I understand and I respect that. And people who said you just can't do it and you make your supervisor sign it, I agree with all of those issues. And so the actual outcome for me was an internal meeting we had yesterday with the question finally being, can you make the change to the report that deletes the building code requirements from your sign-off in support of the project? And I finally said, I can't, and these are the reasons why. And the response of the supervisor was, well, okay, if that's what you say. I definitely don't want to sign those documents, so I'm going to support you on this. And this scenario was really written so that it would be very difficult to say, oh, well, if my boss asked me to do it, I guess it would be okay because I'm just an employee. So that, once again, like the other scenario left a lot of stuff out, this scenario was really written to make it hard to say, oh, I don't care about the building code and life safety issues. So it's a little bit of a setup. Alrighty, we're going to do scenario 3, and remember this is our last one before we transition into more group conversation. And once again, we'll look at the scenario. Jennifer will throw out a generic kind of question, and then we'll come back together to visit about the scenario answer. So here's number 3.
Okay, while folks are answering that one, we got a great question from Jim Schaefer, who wants to know when you're going to update your book. He says he uses it for his graduate planning class at Eastern Michigan University, and updating to reflect new scenarios and the AICP code changes would be helpful. I would concur with that. I do a lot of preparing for the AICP exam, and folks love that book but wish that it was related to the latest code.
Please say that to APA, because I have proposed to update my book, and they've not asked me to do it. And I've gone on to say, or don't use me to update the book, just get something out there that's really current around the existing code. And I think when they test market this stuff, they're just not sure it's a big enough money maker for them. So APA needs to hear from people who use the book and would buy an updated version of it, that there is a market for it, because I've not been able to persuade them to do it.
Okay,
that sounds like a commercial from the shameless Department of Hawking Things, whatever it is.
Shameless Department of Commerce. Yes, the Shameless Department
from Car Talk. But that's basically what it is.
Okay. Well, we do have responses. So Paul and Carl say you don't need to do anything. There's no ethical issues if the plantings meet the code. We have, let's see. Lisa says if the plantings were a mitigation or requirement of the project, then the action of the manager should be questioned, first to the manager, then to supervisors. If the plantings were not a requirement of any sort, then cost reductions were a valid reason to make decisions. The economically troubled times has little to do with ethical behavior. We have questions about what does the code require. Had several people comment about that, including Catherine. Terry asks, would it be possible to take the project back for amendment? Hallie says, if the approval process used the amendment followed the proper procedure, then you don't need to do anything. So it seems like people are leaning towards don't do anything, but there's some questions there.
Thank you, Jennifer. Very helpful. So once again, it would appear on the surface. I kind of crafted this one that people might say, man, I don't know, man, you know, you want to change it? I don't know if we could do that. And right away, the sophisticated reasoners said, you can't jump to the conclusion that this is an ethical issue. We don't have enough information. If the applicant chose to exceed code standards and is now saying, I'm not going to be able to do that, you're down a very different path than if substantial specimen trees were removed, and in exchange for taking out heritage oaks, this extensive landscaping was proposed as a mitigation, and you're changing that. So let's put to rest the notion that this is just all okay under the code and somebody could do it, because then that's not an ethical issue and we don't have anything else to talk about. Let's assume that there was a public hearing process, that the whole project required discretionary approval, and in my made-up scenario, part of the reason for granting the discretionary approval was around the quality of the landscaping. And so then I think when you go through this, the extent to which the project required discretionary approval in a public setting by public bodies, that there is, I agree with the person who said the fact that, you know, it's tough times and somebody says, I can't afford to do it, that's not a trivial argument to make. And, you know, that's assuming that we all really know that these are tough times and that they've got an extraordinarily expensive landscaping plan. I'll make a side comment that the more life you have as a planner, the more often you hear applicants complain that, oh, it's too expensive to do that, and they're really just testing the waters. You know, maybe you'll say, okay, I don't have to. This is a legitimate kind of scenario. It's not one of those throwaway ones. What I think you have to do in this case is to say that staff can support this. We understand it, and we're going to have to run it back through whoever the discretionary approving body might have been, whether it was a zoning board of adjustment or a commission. Another option that I have used when I get the I can't afford it right now argument, and it works, but you've got to have the authority to do this, is I have applicants come in and say, this is a real experience I've worked on just very recently. Renovating a building for a restaurant, very extensive mechanical equipment now on the roof. There's a requirement to screen that. Here's the bid for doing the screening. It's an extra $4,000, and I don't have the money right now. In our community, I'm able to issue an occupancy permit and a business license. I can condition the business license on within the next 6 months going out and doing something. And so that might be an option for your landscaping person, which is to talk about what could we do now, and if you had more time to install the landscaping, what else might you choose to do. So people are right on board with what is the fundamental issue, and that is, in order to understand whether it's even an ethical issue, you need more information. And then defining the kind of ethical issue it is requires more information. So folks are answering these questions brilliantly. So I have one last slide, and then we'll go to the questions. I really think a fun way that you can build your ethical team is to do brown bag lunches where you can enhance your sensitivity to ethical issues as a staff, and you can agree on the method you use to explore the ethical aspects of your decision making. The goal being, if we talk about this stuff occasionally over a brown bag, the method is familiar enough so that we can use it automatically when specific ethical issues come into play. I think communities can be attentive to who's on the planning commissions, trying to get ethical people there to begin with, and whoever's on your planning commissions offering training, which can include the APA Statement of Ethical Principles that gets at some basic conflict of interest issues. And you can train them in this Statement of Ethical Principles. I think we can do a better job in the interview setting. I think we can ask scenario-based ethical questions of applicants, and when in an interview setting you're asked, do you have any questions, you can throw out a scenario that raises some ethical questions. We can do things as simple as putting our codes up at the counter. Somebody just yesterday sent me an email asking me to do something unethical, and I just wrote back really nicely, here's a citation from my Code of Ethics. You're probably not aware of that, and you would not want to ask me to do something unethical. My last item, which I call personal financial management, is simply to say the sad reality is sometimes we end up in incredibly corrupt environments. In the course of 2 to 3 years, you can have a complete change in your elected officials or a brand new city manager, and at a certain point you really do have to be prepared to resign, which means you have to manage your own personal resources so that is an option, and that you can't be forced into doing something really, really dreadful. When I think about ethics, I don't expect that what I do any given day is going to change the world, but what I do believe is that if we discuss and act together to build more ethical organizations, then the world will be changed. And with that final comment, Jennifer, it's back to you to throw out questions.
Okay, wonderful. I will invite everybody to go ahead and give us questions. This one is from Frank. Carol, can you give another example of when the interviewer asks, do you have any questions?
Sure. I would never say, I'm trying to decide if you guys are bums, obviously, but I would ask a question that says, first, it's got to be rooted in the organization. So I would say, I looked at your corridor strategy online, and I want to compliment you, and I saw elements in there that were really very interesting. How would your community handle a situation where you might have somebody who's a long-term resident and really actively engaged in the civic life who comes in and says, my dream is to sell my acreage for the world's largest McDonald's, when you've got a corridor strategy that really calls for, in that same area, a mixed-use development and says no more drive-through businesses. So I asked them that kind of a question, and the answer, I think, does give me some real insight on the kinds of ethical issues that might be at play. Let me go ahead and give you the companion question I ask when I'm interviewing people. And this is a really good question to ask with entry-level hires, because frankly I don't expect entry-level people to know everything about planning. We can teach them about planning, but I can't fix flawed instincts or people who have no sensitivity to ethical issues. So I give a scenario that's very artificial. You've only been with the city for 6 weeks. You're the only person in the whole planning department. Everybody else has gone to the annual retreat. Somebody comes in with an application that's clearly incomplete and they say, don't worry, I talked to the mayor and the mayor told me to come right over and that you would accept it because the mayor knows about this project and really, really likes it. How would you handle that scenario? And fortunately, about 80% of the time, I get very good answers around how I really want to work with you. There seem to be some items that are missing and we'll be able to accept this when the application is complete, or let me call my boss on the cell phone. Every once in a while I get somebody who says, well, whatever the mayor tells me to do, that's my policy and that's what I'm going to be doing. So that would tell me this person would be challenged to understand the ethical dimensions of our work.
Okay, Lenora has a follow-up question. The only 2 interviews were people handpicked by the mayor. How do you choose and ask questions between 2 people, both not qualified for the job?
Oh, well, I'm going to give you some things that you could do, but my first answer is I think you're screwed. I mean, I guess that's really terrible language to use on a webinar. Just rewind that and say, I think this is a lose-lose. I suppose there is some possibility that they'll turn out to be better candidates, but there are, in most communities, there should be a real hiring process which involves screening of resumes and HR review, and I don't know why that hasn't happened. Let me make the assumption that in this community, the way it's working is the mayor sends people in, and these applications are just processed. I think you have some options. I don't think that any of them are particularly good. One way is to do that reflective back talk where you say to whoever is the city manager or the HR director, I'm really confused. Here is our job description where you need the following skills. I'm looking at these resumes. I'm not seeing a match, and I'm really confused as to how to proceed with the interviewing process. You may have already done that. Part of what my goal is in this kind of a situation is to make sure it doesn't just look like I'm the planner and I did this stupid thing, but in fact this is the institutional setting in which we work, so that there are more people on board with this hiring. And if it's the policy, and if you end up just picking the best of a bad set, I would try to get commitment from the city manager around the city undertaking some fairly extensive training for that person, sending them off to conferences, enrolling them in classes if there happen to be a university nearby, to try to remedy the shortcomings. I will tell you, I have a very good friend in Texas who got ordered to do exactly this. The city manager sent over the realtor who sold him a house as a good candidate for a planning job, things being a little slow in the real estate industry. And the planner went back to HR, and HR said, oh, no, you can't even interview this person. They don't meet the minimum quals. Went back to the manager, and the manager's response was to fire the planner. So part of what you need to think about in this is, what is your goal? And if you're ready to die on the line, you can say this is completely unacceptable, and at some point that may be exactly what you want to do. If your goal is to make the best of a bad situation, I'd think about some of those other things I've tossed out.
Wonderful. All right. John Mersman asks, is it acceptable to have anyone buy you lunch? This is a question I get a lot from students and professionals alike. What's your view on this, Carol? When can we have a free lunch?
There are a lot of communities that specifically address this, and I think it's the perfect topic for a brown bag. When is it acceptable to buy lunch? And in my experience, it really varies from community to community. It's probably, when I worked in Berkeley, for example, I was just being seen eating with a developer. The issue wasn't even who paid for it. Being seen eating with a developer was considered unacceptable conduct, that the expectation of the director was that you would have an adversarial relationship with the development community. So my first point is you need to understand the culture of the place in which you work. My second thing is I think it's better if your planning entity has a consistent position on this, not, well, Planner A will go, let me take her to lunch, but Planner B won't. I think it's an absolute no-no to have somebody buy you lunch when they need something from you. As in, you're currently reviewing their project and they say, I want to explain the nuances of the Rootin' Tootin' Motel so that you better understand it when you're doing site plan review. Can I take you out to lunch? No. Not while a project is under review. But I don't think you have to say to people, whoa, I'm not going to lunch with you. I think you can say to somebody, lunch, no, but if you want some time to just talk with me, come by and we can, go in my office and pull the site plan out and have a cup of coffee. So you don't have to be ugly about it, but I don't ever let somebody buy me lunch when there's anything they need from me. Whether it's a renewal of a consulting contract or some kind of project review. Where I am personally okay with somebody buying me lunch is when there is no immediate opportunity for anybody to have financial gain, and it's really just around getting to know one another. But I'm very careful to say, if you buy this time, I buy next time. So it's not, oh, it's time for my monthly feed for the planning director, I have to take her out. But instead says, if we're sitting here because we're trying to build a relationship, then we're going to flip back and forth and we will take turns having lunch together. So that's how I would respond to when is a free lunch okay.
Okay, along a related line of thinking, Carol. All right, you're a consultant who did work with an organization in the past. You developed a good friendship with the supervisor at that organization. An event has come up, you have 2 tickets to a football game, you would love to take that person along, and you invite them to the football game. But you have a future contract, not with that organization, but that person is one of the stakeholders that will be engaged as part of this future planning project with another agency. Ethical, unethical?
I think it's unethical, and here's the reason that I think it's unethical. The nature of your relationship grew out of the consultancy, and so it has become a personal relationship, but it first came about because there was that business relationship. There is the potential for that to be ongoing, and there is, and I said this is one of my touchstones, is there a question at play where somebody can influence a decision where somebody is going to make some money? So let me give you an example where, it might be okay to do the football tickets. 2 people went to college together, and they've gone to the football game every single year, and the one is a planner and the other is a lawyer, and the lawyer always buys the tickets, and all of a sudden the planner is now working in the town where the lawyer practices land use law. The friendship doesn't have to go away. But the point at which that planner is working on a project where the attorney is engaged, then it changes. So I think in this case, because there's something pending where somebody can make some money, I think you have to step away from that that opportunity. And, maybe you could do something small and nice where you say, normally I would offer that, but I know you have such high ethics that I really don't want to do that. But I would be happy to donate the tickets to a charitable organization, and they can pick who goes. And if you've got a group out there you'd like me to favor with the tickets, I could do that. End of answer.
Right. So Eric Spence asks, we have design guidelines that require a certain style of building in a specific district of the city. Due to the state of the economy, the administration is trying to get the Planning Commission to water down those standards to allow for a new development. Is it unethical for the administration to petition the Commission to try to get them to approve something against the design guidelines?
In my experience, and I don't know what state this is coming from, so I don't know state enabling legislation, but the word guideline is not ordinance. And I think you can have guidelines adopted by, and in fact they often are, adopted by planning commissions, adopted by councils, but they are never, the word guideline is in there. And so I don't know, I don't think it's unethical. Where it becomes problematic is if it is not a public process. And there's no, kind of big picture, how does this help community, how does this harm the community? So what I would suggest is that you need to go through an amendment to the guidelines that says what are the kinds of buildings where we think we could still get quality design, but not necessarily what the design was called for in the original guidelines. And I think that has to be a public process. And you could do a short amendment to provide for that. So if guidelines are adopted by policy, then I think they can be changed by policy. Where I think we have a real ethical issue, and the term administration is used, and so I don't know whether that means somebody outside of the planning department or supervisors within the planning department. If the notion is please ignore these guidelines, then I think you've got an ethical problem, and I think staff needs to come back with some really creative solutions. Let's have one of Carol's famous brown bag lunches where we sit as staff and talk and say, okay, what might work, and what would be a process that we could quickly implement that would allow us to show some greater flexibility if in fact that is the policy that the elected officials want us to pursue in the community. And you can even send straw dogs to council meetings, and you can get a sense of some of this stuff, or at least in my community you can get a sense where I work, is the contractor who doesn't want to adhere to the guidelines goes to the council and complains about them and says, in this economy, you're fortunate that anybody wants to build anything, and your design guidelines are chasing good people away. If the council doesn't take up that comment, it just lies there flat, then I would say there's not huge public sentiment around it. If you get 2 or 3 comments about, yeah, maybe we do want to think about it, then I think you just have to figure out a way to say in a more public way that the guidelines are being changed, that we're amending them, that we're adopting a temporary supplement, that we're throwing them out because we don't think we can afford them. So I don't have a problem with people changing their minds. What I have problems with is selective interpretation, saying, okay, on this project you just have to ignore the guidelines. And then I think you have to come back with, well, I'm not sure how I would ignore them, but I certainly understand what your issue is as administration. I think there are some other ways that we can work on this to get some greater clarity, to pursue some flexibility, but that has to be a public process. End of answer.
Okay, well, wonderful. Eric says thank you because they have a meeting about it tonight, so you've better prepared him to go into that meeting. Earlier, you mentioned as one of the examples of an interview question that you might ask was related to the location of fast food restaurants in, say, unhealthy neighborhoods. I'm curious, what is the responsibility of the planner to address these issues? So we all feel overwhelmed in our jobs, have lots of planning things we're trying to do. What is our responsibility to be truly comprehensive? Where do we draw the line of saying, I just can't take this on my plate, using, for example, the issue of fast food restaurants, or in California you've got the issue of marijuana stores, things like that. So how do you deal with those conflicts of taking on issues or not?
Okay. Just to clarify, in the example of my interview question, what the framework was, we had an adopted plan where we wanted to do corridor redevelopment, and we want to make it more pedestrian-oriented and narrow the streets. You know, it's a comprehensive corridor strategy in which we say no more fast food restaurants. But I think the question is around, as part of doing comprehensive planning, there are a lot of interesting areas, and a huge one is where can fast food restaurants locate in our communities, because the issue is really twofold. Not only is there a high concentration of fast food restaurants in lower income communities, but there's a dearth of healthy food choices in the community. So if I were trying to figure out where I was going to spend my time and what would be the issues that the planning department would be focused on, because I think it really is a good question. When planners note that everything is interrelated, and we can't end up unable to do our job because there's yet one aspect that we haven't explored, is you've got to go back and look at the closest thing you have to a general plan for your community, and then from that, a work program for what the planning department is supposed to do. And that work program should really provide guidance for what might be things that would be kind of fun and interesting, and can we figure out a way to do this, because as staff we all got to participate in the work program, versus we are unable to take on that issue. And I don't think it's unethical to say I can't do everything at once. But I think it's not helpful to say we don't do that when we haven't thought about what a work program is, what our adopted plans call for, and looked at what is it that we are focusing on. So if there's a well thought out work program that shows what are the initiatives that you're undertaking, and you're really interested in the fast food thing, then you got to get it on the list of things. If we don't do it this year, might we do it some other year? And I want to thank God for all of the places like Berkeley and Santa Monica, you know, that figure this stuff out, and then the rest of us years later know how to write the ordinance so that when our communities are interested in banning the fast food restaurants, somebody's already duked it out and it's been adjudicated in the courtrooms. So that's my final comment. If these are the kinds of things that really speak to your heart, I think you need to find a planning environment where that kind of stuff is really going to resonate as well. and that may not be where you are right now. But I don't think you have to do everything all at once. That's the answer. You are not unethical because you are not all things to all people.
Okay, Carol, thank you very much. I think that wraps up the questions that we've had come in. We had some really good questions from our audience, and you gave really delightful responses, and hopefully folks learned something and had a new view on how they might consider ethical challenges in the future. For everybody, you will be logging out in just a moment, and you'll have a pop-up survey that will come in. Please take the time to complete that. I'll be providing that feedback to Carol so that she can continue to learn from the presentation she's given. And you can log your CM credit today on the CM calendar. It is under today's date. And I will look forward to seeing all of you at an upcoming webcast. Carol, thank you again very much. I will follow up by email with the results of the poll at the end. All right, Carol, I'm going to go ahead and close the session for us, okay?
All right, and thank you very, very much. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.